Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. It is 10 o'clock Pacific right now. We'll wait just another minute or so to let a few more attendees join the webinar, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So just about one more minute. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So the topic today is modern marketing plays for converting 100% of website visitors who should convert. Today's webinar is hosted by both Intellimize and Mad Kudu. So thank you everyone for attending. As we're going through the webinar, you can use the Zoom chat function in your window to ask questions throughout the webinar, and we will try to get to those if they are pertinent to a certain slide. We'll try to get to those right then and there at that moment in time. Otherwise, we will save some other questions for the end of the webinar. So please hang tight. So now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Guy Yalif, will you please take it away and introduce yourself?
Will do. Thanks, Sesame. Hi, everyone. I'm Guy Yalif, CEO of Intellimize. We've been putting AI in the hands of growth professionals for a few years to help them drive more revenue and more leads to sales. And for me, that journey started longer ago than I care to admit, when I wrote a rules-based expert system back in college. And I've spent the last 15 years helping marketers across industries while at Twitter, Brightroll, and Yahoo. And we're honored today to talk together with Francis and Guillaume. Francis, take it away.
Yeah, hey everyone, and hey Guy and Guillaume. So I'm Francis, I'm the co-founder and CRO at Mad Kudu. Super excited to talk with Guy and Guillaume because we've been working together for quite some time. Back in the day with Guillaume when he was at Mention before moving from France to the US, and with Guy when actually Guillaume was at Segment, leveraging essentially AI to create better journeys for customers. So at Mad Kudu, we do predictive analytics to help companies create a more frictionless and relevant journey at scale for all their customers, and we're super excited to talk about personalization today.
Hey everyone, I'm Guillaume, or as everyone calls me, G. Yeah, hi Francis, hi Guy, and hi Sesame. I'm basically the growth guy here. So I've been a customer, and I'm a customer of many tools, including Intellimize, Mad Kudu, and a couple of others. And I was a customer, and I was at Segment, at Drift, and a couple other places. And these days, I do a SaaS startup advisory after having multiple growth roles. With that, I'll kickstart the content part of this webinar. And so today we're going to talk about SaaS, right? And this is a question that I ask, I'd say, fairly often when I do keynotes. And I want you all to reflect on, most of you, I'm sure, like sell SaaS, or at least sell something on the internet, right? Which means you also buy stuff. And when you think about the buying experience, ask yourself when you buy something, is this an enjoyable experience? And I can tell you, when I ask a room with like 100 or more people, marketers in the room, most of them raise their hands when they say, yeah, sure, like I sell SaaS, yes, I buy SaaS. And I ask them, do you enjoy it? Almost all the hands go down, right? And that is impressive, because it is our failure as marketers not to create an enjoyable experience that we do, let's say, feel every day, all right? And so how come we are not doing, we're not creating that enjoyable experience which we would enjoy ourselves, right? So let's think about that, right? Let's think about how can we give our website visitors the same experience that we would want when we go out and we buy some SaaS, right? And so if we move to the next slide, right? The bottom line, is yes, it's frustrating, and it's just not me, it's just not you. I have a stat actually from Forrester, and there's a 2017 analysis from them over 1,000 marketers. They asked them, like, how do you buy SaaS, right? 70% of them start with a generic search query rather than a brand, right? Which means that they don't really go out of their way to talk to you, right? They're trying to get some kind of confirmation, reassurance by doing some generic searches. And if we move to the next slide, what's really interesting is that this data point here, B2B buyers do 12 searches, right? This comes from a 2016 Google Insights team survey. Right, so marketers on average do 12 Google queries before engaging with any brand, right? Which is at the same time insane, but makes a ton of sense. I mean, when I go to like reserve a hotel or a restaurant, I'm sure I make at least 12 queries, right? 12 searches. And so why not when I buy SaaS for my company? Of course, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm the same human. I'm going to have the same behavior, right? Which means that we need to meet the people, the future customers, where they are in the funnel. We can't wait for them to come to us and engage and say, hey, I want to talk to you. I want to buy your software, right? Because that's more or less what we're doing. And that's why we have, let's say, a very small percentage of people that engage with us. So if we move to the next slide, Guy, I want to think of like why that is. And one of the challenges that I found when I look at what's being done in the market, what I see is if you reflect and you think of like good advertising and let's say poor advertising, right? One of the issues of poor advertising is that it overinflates, let's say, the value of the product, and it's kind of oversimplifies ways that you need to get to the value of the product. An example of that is gym clubs. But if you think of a gym club, right? I've looked at and I looked at a lot of gym club ads, right? Because I'm like 36, so I'm right in the male 36 in San Francisco. I'm right in the demographic for a gym club, right? 100%. And you look at the ad for the gym club, I always see fit people, super fit people, which means they're already getting the value. I don't see people like me, like two kids dad in the Bay Area who are not fit and who are like sweating on the treadmill, right? And if you compare that to SaaS buying, when I'm a SaaS buyer, I buy for like over 500K worth of SaaS per year, right? And all the ads that I see are ads. Most of the ads that I see are ads that oversimplify and that just tell me, oh, just buy it and life is going to be awesome. It's going to be just so easy. We never state all of the effort that needs to get there, right? And that is one of the challenges. And I want to reflect that on a graph. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll explain you what's happening. This is a graph that I've built to explain a bit those 12 searches and the behavior life cycle of the buying life cycle of the customer. And so if you imagine that on a scale of 0 to 1, where 1 is the conversion event, the buying event, right? Your target audience, we hope, might have some, let's say, fit some desire, some belief that the product that you have or the problem that you solve matches their needs, right? It's not high enough that it will push them convert immediately, but it gets them somewhere. So example, a past company I worked at, Drift, which is a live chat tool, or if you think of Intellimize, which is a conversational optimization tool, it's marketers might think, yeah, I mean, that is a problem that I have. And they might not know the product well enough. They might not know their needs well enough that they will buy, right? So let's say it gets them to 20%, right? And they're going to do those 12 searches. They're going to visit third-party websites. They're going to discover the market. They're going to visit maybe your website. They're going to do a self-discovery of the product, right? And at one point, they might sign up. They might sign up for the product, they might sign up for a demo, they might sign up for some more content. They're giving you their PII, their email, and they're signing up, right? And what happens there is exactly what I described before. Now they experience the real product, right? And the likelihood, the desire to buy goes down. The willingness to buy decreases sharply after sign up. I've observed that time and time again, right? It's because now the hype dies and they're going to face the real product, all right? And that is our failure. And all of what I expressed before, I can show you in the next slide here, which is, that is something that I've built, right, times and times again. That's what all of us as marketers are supposed to build, which is when you build an acquisition campaigns, let's say it's paid acquisition, and you're going to put some, you're going to target some different queries, right? Or you're going to put some different ad copies on Facebook. Whatever it is, we've learned as marketers to build, very granular campaigns and that target very specific audiences or personas with very specific messages. Some of them might be free, some of them might be trial, different personas, whatever, right? And so you're going to build some landing pages that are adapted for each of those messages, each of those audiences. We capture the PII. After then, what happens? Most of the time, we drop them in our website or on the product, which is very generic, right? There's almost no personalization. And so the efforts that we've done is moot. And that is insane. And in some ways, it is a destruction of value. Think about it, right? We've spent money to find what makes people tick versus product, what makes them react, what creates some desire, and then you ignore what you have learned. You ignore it completely, just throw it away. Right? So whatever, now they're with us, they're going to stick. It's not true, they're not going to stick, they're going to bounce, right? And so if we go to the next slide, that is our challenge. Where as a marketer, we've been too focused on the conversion event and not on the experience. And the truth is, the experience after conversion is not as good as the experience before the conversion, right? And so we need to make that entire experience great from end to end. Right, and I often say, like, when I do advisory and consulting, I look at websites, I look at the behavior. One of the behaviors I look at is the bounce rate, and the bounce rate is always very high, right? Sometimes it's like 50%, sometimes it's like 90%, and that's insane. It means that we are, I'd say, how can I say, almost insulting 9 out of 10 people that are coming to us by not respecting what they have already told us. And I think, Guy, you told me some couple of days ago about a even higher number. I think it was like 98.
It was. In fact, while we as growth professionals spend $100 billion a year trying to attract prospects to our website, giving them the personalized messages you were just talking about, we see industry-wide 98% failure rate to turn those visitors into customers. We're leaving a lot of money on the table. And as you said, not treating people with the respect that we treat them just a moment ago.
And so like real buyers have lost the trust, right? And we're failing as marketers, we're failing to get the conversions that we should get. And so if we move to the next slide, our problem is that we're stuck in this kind of false beliefs, right? I mean, the way that we are trying to understand the audience and giving them what they want, right? And so we need to identify what they really want. We need to identify our own false beliefs, and we need to change our behavior to give the experience that we want. So if we move to the next slide, the first false belief is that personalization can only exist when we know who the user is, right? That just is plain wrong. I see so many people who say, well, I'm waiting for the sign up. Well, what that slide means is I'm waiting for the sign up to personalize, right? I can't do anything before because I don't know who they are. So like, let's just do like a generic website. Let's just do a generic email, whatever. It's just not true, right? You can actually start personalizing very early, and you should, right? And so next slide is, what do we know? Right? What can we discover, what can we learn about the customer, each individual, that will help us tailor, I'd say, a bit of a better experience. Let's look into a couple of examples I've put forward in the next slide. You know, a couple of free things is like, what's the acquisition source? Is it paid? Is it free? If it's paid, you should 100% track that, and I'll show you later on, right? When they come to you, what pages have they seen? I hope that you have a blog with some content. What that means is that each of those blog posts should be tagged for a specific persona. You can capture that, and you can, when they come back to your home page or your product or your pricing page, if you have different personas, you should adapt that page based on what they saw. If the same individual, same cookie, read 3 pages, imagine on like the marketer persona, right? If that's one of your personas, that page should be adapted for the marketer. And I'm sure we're going to see some examples about how that is done, right? That's what should happen. Where are they based? Are they in the US? Are they in the city? Are they outside of the US? And then there's like a bit harder things where you need to pay for some data. But there's a lot of good third-party sources, which is like, who do they work for based on their IP address, what technologies they have on their website, and so on and so on, right? But just the basics here on the left bring you a ton of value. Some kind of insights is way better than just no insights, right? And now let's go to the next slide to give you an example of paid, right? And so as a marketer, I've been doing a ton of paid over the years, right? And it strikes me that most of the marketers, most of the companies I see do not leverage the possible insights. What you see here is a URL on the left side of the screen, right? You see an URL with a big query string. So all the question mark opens a query string, and all the spellrets here actually give me some parameters. What you have between the brackets is value track. It's a feature from AdWords, which enables you to get dynamic data from each click on AdWords, right? And Facebook has the same, right? Facebook has the same different parameters, but basically the same. What you see on the right is the data I have captured from one given click, and you can see the date. It says 2015, right? That was like 4 years ago. 3 years and a half, November, right? And so you can see, I get the data. Of course, it comes from Google. I know the headline. I know the keyword. I know the match type here. I know the search channel. I know the text of the ad, right? For that specific click. If that text of the ad could, so here I can see like social media listening, real time. I can actually use that to change the experience in the site. And if you're already buying traffic, that's what you should be doing. You should go ahead after this webinar, you should go ahead and you should change your URLs and start capturing that, right? And so on the next slide, here's the truth, right? I'm going to say it again, but it's very important. Something made them tick, something made them react. Not capturing that information is your biggest missed opportunity, right? You're throwing it away. And I want to give you an example to really nail it down. Let's go to the next picture, right? This is what's happening, right? You're going to a restaurant. You have someone welcomes you, and you have a waiter, and waiter says, "What do you want?" And say, "I'll take a steak, well done," right? And this is what you get, right? How frustrated would you be, right? Of course, no proper restaurant would ever do that, right? And like waiters and waitresses have been doing their job perfectly for like dozens and hundreds of years, right? And the marketing world, this is what's happening. Users are telling us what they want, we ignore it, and we serve them something else, right? And that is not a steak. So on the next slide, the truth is there's always data. I want to make sure that no one leaves this webinar thinking that, oh yeah, okay, G told me something about what he does in SaaS, blah, 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 but like, it does not apply to me because I have a specific industry, I have a specific persona, and there's no data. Honestly, I've helped dozens of companies. I've yet to find one of them where there's no data available. Quite the contrary. The harder the data is, of course, it's harder, it's a point, right? The more unique it is, the more valuable it will be, because it means that your competitors do not have the data, right? And that is very important. That gives you a competitive edge, all right? I'll go to the next slide. So here's like a quick recap. It's like you get the data that you need to know. You create an experience that is so good the conversion takes care of itself. That's not for me. That's actually a quote I took from Bill Walsh, right? Bill Walsh says, the score takes care of itself. It's a great book. And I thought about it. Yes, it's the same thing. Do not focus on the conversion. Focus on the experience. If the experience is delightful, people will convert, right? So personalize before the conversion, right? And if we go into one of the plays, right, I want to give a couple of examples here, right? So what we said earlier, we personalize as early as possible and for as long as possible, if possible, right into the product. And there might be challenges in the product, but at least let's take it from like the very first experience until the onboarding, right? And so there's a lot of like different forms of data that we'll be able to take. We talked about the intent, we talked about behavioral data, about demographic data, and we engage with them where they are on the funnel. If they're on your website, engage there. If they're not on your website, engage somewhere else. If it's sending emails, personalize the emails, right? And you personalize, the more you learn, the more you personalize. It's not like, oh, I learned one thing, and so I'm going to personalize everything based on that. If they react, if they continue to engage, if they come back to your website, you learn something else. Continue to personalize with that, right? So that's one important thing. There's often as marketers, we think there's sign up, no sign up, right? It's a very binary thing of engagement, right? That, as we talked when we were preparing that webinar with Guy and Francis, we then ended on something. It's actually a spectrum of engagement, which means people coming to your website, it's an engagement. People opening your email, it's an engagement. People click on your ads, it's an engagement, right? And sure, sign up is an important one, but to be honest, if you apply the right technology, if you do like IP to domain, and if you like look at who it is and blah, 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 and all of those like advanced strategies, you already know who's on your website. At least you know the account. You know what they're reading. You know how many people have come. You know if they visited your G2 crowd page, what, all of that. It's a spectrum. They're already engaged. And you should treat them as such. You should treat them as people who are already interested and already engaged, right? So if we go to the next slide, that's the false belief, right? It's not an all or nothing, right? It's throughout the entire funnel. And if you go to slide 21, this is a typical funnel. And typically, the personalization only starts at the blue activate horizontal line, right? When we start sending emails. And I think the big win I've had in these past years is to actually start moving the personalization, understanding the progressiveness of the engagement up the funnel, first to the sign up, then to the chat, and before that to the website. And granted, as you go up, it gets harder. You need more technology, you need, I'd say, more MarTech, but it also gets more valuable. There's just more people there. The higher up you're on the funnel, the more people you get, which means the impact of the change on conversion yields more impact, right? And so to nail it down on the next slide, that's what people thought. You can't personalize before sign up. And after sign up, you just send a bunch of emails. That is no longer true, right? That is no longer true. And if you go to the next slide, do not try and make it perfect. Don't. Any kind of personalization will work better than no personalization. Not making a choice is making a choice, right? What you think your standard, your default website, that is personalized, right? For one kind of audience. It's not generic, right? Which means all the other people who don't match that persona will not recognize themselves and will bounce, right? So at least creating different variants and trying to guess who will match best each variant is a win, right? And I'll stop here and I'll let a Guy and Francis talk, but creating those variants, trying to understand your audience is great. If you can have a machine do it for you, even better, but at least try to adapt yourself to your audience. And that's it for me.
Right. Thank you, G. And yeah, I think maybe piggyback offing that, I think the core reason for a lot of this kind of desire around perfection is this, constant struggle that we have with quality of leads of like, all right, we're trying to, personalize, but who do we personalize for? And And I think that element can be really tricky because while we always hear about, the sales and marketing alignment of, the leads are actually good, no, they're bad, no, they're actually good, you just don't know how to sell. It's actually more of a spectrum, right? Leads are all carrying of some potential, but some actually carry more than others. And so when you actually think about getting started with personalization, I think it's really important to start in one place. And G mentioned a lot of personas, and I think that can be a little bit overwhelming if you start thinking of how to actually personalize for all the myriad of personas that are hitting your website. But ultimately, it really starts by identifying this narrow ideal customer profile and really, really optimizing for that persona. And interestingly, that's something that people have been thinking about a lot, at least on the post sign-up phase that G was talking about. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little about this. And this is where lead scoring really comes into play. And that's why we actually built a lead scoring module to help companies isolate these high value leads. And my strong belief is that ultimately every single company B2B on earth is doing some form of lead scoring, right? So when you start, you have this kind of gut feeling qualification. You're just going to look at the emails and you're going to see, oh, this is a laser shark email or a QQ.com email, and therefore you're just not going to contact them. And then you move on to something a little bit more sophisticated where you define an ICP with some rule-based stuff, and based off of that, you're going to route things differently. And then ultimately you move on to some more AI, because now you have multiple personas. Even within your accounts, you're going to have different people that have different roles in the selling process, and therefore you start having this need for AI. But ultimately, regardless of what model you're using, the only thing that matters is how you use the model. Models ultimately are just a mathematical representation of the world, and therefore they are incomplete. And they are going to be wrong to some extent. And what really is what's going to help your business grow is how you actually use them. And I think that's really the part that we want to dive into. So talking a bit about forms and maybe this, I guess the conversion point, but looking at the conversion point from the experience standpoint, to kind of go back to what G was talking about. When we look at the sales process we have today, it's a complete cluster. We ask for a ton of information from leads that come to our website, because we want to make sure that we're able to put them into this qualification process to make sure that sales is not going to tell us that the leads are bad, and then we're going to have this fight of telling them that they just don't know how to close the leads. But when you think of it, it's actually a terrible experience for the right leads, for the leads that you really care about. If IBM comes to your website and is requesting a demo, you don't want to ask them what their company size is. You just want to give them access to a rep. And so the only reason you're asking for the company size is because they're coming along with some lower quality leads. And so because of these lower quality leads, you're deteriorating the overall experience for these high quality leads. I think really thinking about the idea of using AI and using all of the data that's available to be able to enhance the experience for the right kind of leads is critical. And only is it critical to improve the experience for them, what we're also seeing, and there's a lot of studies around this, is that longer forms, as we all know, actually have lower conversion rates. So you're basically just increasing your cost of acquisition for your right types of leads by deteriorating the experience. And at the same time, the information that you're getting is not extremely accurate. So there's also a lot of reports that look at, when you're asking for different fields, how accurate are they? And what we're finding is that we're basically paying more to acquire leads with incorrect information. So you're deteriorating the experience, paying more, and you're not getting the right kind of information. So ultimately, I think the part that we have to think about is that we can do better than these kind of forms that ask for a ton of stuff. And we live in an era where there's a lot of data that's available, as Gia talked about. And really, as marketers, I think it's important for us to understand how we can leverage that data to be able to really create a better experience for our prospects. And so what I wanted to do is cover a couple examples of things that we've put in place over the years, just to kind of inspire you in terms of what is possible with the data and the technologies that are out there, to give you a sense of how to start with basic personalization for the right types of leads. And so in this first example, what we ended up testing was the idea of saying, if a high quality lead is trying to download a piece of content, if we know they're qualified, we don't necessarily need to ask for more information because we know we want to reach out. And the most important thing is for them to get access to that piece of content so that they can have kind of a frictionless experience on the website. And so the form on the left essentially asks for a minimum amount of data points, just the email address and the phone number, whereas on the right, because we don't know who this person is or if they're qualified, we're actually going to expand and let them add more information so that we can actually qualify them further down the line. And that, yields higher conversion rates and ultimately is helpful for the user. Another element when we're still looking at these different conversion points is on signups. So again, when you have these high quality leads that are hitting your website, you really want to make sure that you offer some form of white glove process to onboard them and really create a sales process that's helpful. Like salespeople are really here, and even more today in our world where, as G said, right, you can research products all over the place. So what is the value of having a human, talk to you? Well, it's really answering your questions and being more consultative. So it's really about how can this person be helpful in the sales process? So understanding that and trying to figure out how do I get people that I want to talk to actually opt into a consultation about how my product works is something that's extremely important and helpful. And I guess like one of the recurring themes here is that when you create a frictionless and a more relevant journey, you end up having higher conversion rates. And maybe a final example that we had here, which we run back in the day with G at Segment, even though I still use his email address here, is when someone's requesting a demo and we know they're qualified, instead of letting them, hit a thank you page and then following up over email, well, we know they're qualified. We know a rep is going to reach out to offer a calendar. Why not offer the calendaring experience on the spot on the website? And again, where this was really interesting was that doing this with Segment, which was highly sophisticated. G had already been in there automating all the emails from the reps, making sure they were highly personalized, that we were personalized in a relevant manner, and that there was a strict SLA. We were still able to generate a very significant lift in pipeline created from the demo request, solely because we actually made the experience frictionless and instantaneous for the right kind of leads. So on the two positive elements is that the sales team was excited because they were getting meetings pop up on their calendar without having to do anything, only with qualified leads. And at the same time, the leads were happy because they got this VIP experience on the fly as they were coming through the website. And I think that essentially is what we should all strive for. And so the conclusion of this is that data is all over the place. There's so many ways to access it that as marketers, we have to focus on using it to build a better experience. And that's really going to be the challenge of the next decades on how do we create this frictionless and really relevant experience for our customers using personalization. And while everything we covered here was, I think, kind of personalization 101 of really going on, you have an ideal customer profile, what do you do with it? I'll let Guy talk a little bit more about some of the more advanced use cases that we've been running with more AI-powered personalization.
Thanks, Francis. So if you are now using the data you have at every step of the way, like Guillaume described, and then focusing on, hey, how do I make sure the customers I care about get the right experience? The next thing we often hear people talk about is, gosh, this is going to take a long time. Personalization will take forever. I've got to create a lot of creative. I have to think about every different segment. And given how most people do it today, there is some truth to that. We often see when people are personalizing, then taking a rules-based approach. And it's great because you're not treating everyone the same, just like Guillaume was talking about earlier. You are taking some of what you did in ads and applying it to your website. Great. It can be particularly useful when one audience absolutely cannot see what another audience sees, like you want to run the New York promotion only in New York. Well, once we do this, we tend to like it. We tend to say, hey, this is really good. I'm going to show the San Francisco promotion only in Northern California. And then we define more of them. We say, hey, for this audience or this page or this context, I want to show this message, this offer, this experience, and we keep going. And in fact, we write a whole bunch of rules. And often we top out at a few tens of these. If you wanted to do a rule for every city in the United States, you'd have 37,000 of them. So this quickly becomes unwieldy. And so we we'd like to break this myth by saying, look, the reality is doing personalization can actually feel a lot more like running a whole bunch of A/B tests at the same time, where you get more lift and you are figuring out the right experience, both for the ICP that Francis was talking about and the rest of your customers too. If you have questions about this, I'll reiterate what Sesame said. Feel free to click on the QA tab and share them. So the third play to share with you, do more, faster. Try using machine learning so that you can run a whole bunch of experiments in parallel, so that you can, on the one hand, use the knowledge you have to bring the right data as you're building a profile all along the way, and your knowledge about the ideal customer profile to build the right experience for them, and then layer in a whole bunch more. Let machine learning and AI accelerate that process, because the truth is, while we as experienced growth professionals have ideas that are in the ballpark, none of us really know what's going to work. None of us know that the right thing for Guillaume is this, the right thing for Francis is this, and the right thing for me is this other thing. And so you can use machine learning to try a whole bunch of ideas at the same time and use it to figure out automatically what's right to show each person. And I'll share some numbers with you, what we've observed. Over the last 2 years, we've seen across all the companies we've been working with, the average tested 177 different ideas. If you tried all the combinations of those ideas, there were 78 million of them. Now you might think, hey, Guy, you're exactly making the point. Like, this is going to take forever. I need to create 78 million pieces of creative. No way, not at all. You'll personalize in a more modular way, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, these 177 ideas, had you tried this personalization and said, hey, is this the right thing to show my ICP? It would have taken you more than 25 years per year, more than a quarter century to go through all of those, given that we as B2B marketers, we don't tend to get a lot of traffic. And so I invite you to try this third play by modularizing what you're testing. Think about that personalization using the data you have as, you know, I'm going to try a bunch of headlines, and then a bunch of images, and then a bunch of calls to action, and then some press, and then some testimonials. With Guillaume, we in the past, and Francis, we in the past ran plays where, you know, someone would show up at a website, we'd use reverse IP lookup and show, you know what, hey, there's a logo farm. Why don't we try populating that logo farm, not all of them, some of them, with their competitors? Wouldn't that make their competitive juices flow? Wouldn't that make them feel like the solution's more relevant? Or down in that testimonials on screen, what if we showed them a case study that's relevant for their industry? You can try those plays using the data you're building along the way, and try a bunch of variants of them in parallel, like this company did. Perkville is a B2B SaaS company that enables small businesses to build loyalty programs. They get less than 2,000 page views a day. How many of you can identify with that? They tried 39 different ideas that, if you multiplied out all the possible combinations, they had 633,000 possible versions of the page running. Mission impossible, right? There's no way you could figure out which one's the right one. They used machine learning to get 42% lift with 99% statistical significance in 2 months. So this myth that it's going to take us forever to go personalize, we can break it. And the way we get to break it is correctly applying machine learning, using what you know about your ICP, using the data you have to date. And in fact, what we've seen on average when people are trying this approach is that almost all the time, they actually get better results. They get more of the leads we as growth professionals are looking for. Almost 9 out of 10 campaigns that people ran, they got lift on. That's 4x, more than 4x higher than what you get with A/B testing. And the average lift, 46%. What would it do for each one of your businesses if you took the data you have and your knowledge about the ICP and almost increased leads by half? It probably would help each one of us a bunch. And these are averages we've seen across all customers for the last couple of years. And so I invite you to pair Guillaume's thinking about, hey, you don't have to be perfect. You've got data all along the way. Francis is thinking about, hey, know your ICP and try to smooth out the sales process with this thinking of, it doesn't have to take a lot of time. You actually can break some of your probably existing assumptions and try a whole bunch of ideas in parallel. With that third play as context, I wanted to share some takeaways. We, the three of us and Sesame, invite you to put into action back in the office on Monday morning. And the first is start personalizing right away. Take what you're doing in paid ads and in email and apply it to this portion of your prospect journey where people do sign up. Second, do this with each bit of incremental information you have, whether you can profile someone as ICP or not, whether you gain additional data from what they've done on your site. It'll make you almost certainly a lot of money and generate a bunch more leads. Third, if you're doing A/B testing to do this and thinking, oh gosh, I have to predefine rules, you can use machine learning to break that, accelerate the process, and learn prospect by prospect what to show people, so that really the ultimate thing, you can meet prospects where they are in their journey with you. Whether they've never heard of you and they're doing their 12 searches like Guillaume was talking about, they've signed up for email, or they're already engaged with you with some content. And so our hope is that these three plays help you go drive more leads for your businesses today. And now the three of us would like to open it up together with Sesame for questions. Fire away in the Q&A panel you see down below.
Great. Well, thank you, Guy, Francis, and Guillaume for that very insightful webinar content. We do have a handful of questions already from the audience, but yes, please feel free, everybody, to keep those questions coming in by using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your panel on the screen. So the first question we have, I will pose this to Guy, but feel free, anybody, to jump in. The question is, you talk a lot about experimenting. At what point will I know if I've run enough, and enough is in quotes, enough experiments, and that the percentage lift I will achieve is the most I'll get? How should I think about this?
Great question. I'll invite at least Guillaume to chime in as well. My suggestion to you would be, every test you're running has an opportunity cost. And so you should continually be focusing on the next highest ROI place to go. That place in your experience is probably a place where you've got a lot of drop off, or a place where you're not having the impact you want. And so keep working on that place till it's not the highest ROI place to go after. This may be a frustrating answer because the answer is a little bit like never. Like maybe that's good for all of us because we'll have jobs forever. But I don't think it is the right mental model to think, oh, I've got the lift I need, I'm done. Because there will always be more you can learn about your prospect, more you can tailor about the experience so that you can go drive more leads. Guillaume, want to add to that?
Sure. So what Guy just described is actually moving at a different place in the funnel, right? And finding another spot to like optimize, which is, I'd say like probably half of my job. And the other half of my job is actually, I'd say ignoring averages. Is that when you have like, let's say you have like a 5% sign-up rate, you might think, well, I asked my friends, 5% is pretty good. That's all I'll get, right? Well, that 5% actually, it's a forest that hides many different, let's say, groups of and personas of users, some of which might convert at a much lower rate, which means you actually probably have a cohort, a persona group that signs up at 10, 15%, maybe the one that comes from ads, maybe the one that read your article, and others that convert at 0%, right? That's what I focus on, right? So I do two things. I move at other spots in the funnel, and then I try to understand who converts very well. Why? Can I get more of those people, or can I give the same experience that is relevant to the others? Those that convert at 0%, why? Do I have a bad acquisition strategy, or am I giving them a poor experience? So I move up and down the funnel, and then I cut each, I'd say, step in the funnel in multiple buckets to understand what's happening.
Great. Thanks, guys, for answering that. Our next question is, we have less than 100 visitors on our site each day. Is it possible for us to do this type of personalization as well? Yeah,
I don't see why not. You know, I mean, this is only two things. Only if you have like 100 visitors and you're very confident that they're all the same, maybe you're in a very specific industry, that's very rare. But imagine that you're in the oil rig industry, right? And you're selling actually like pipes, right? And you have pipe buyers. Then I'm saying well, if you have a hundred of those, like, and they all have the same roles and titles, and all have all the same company size, maybe not. For all the rest of us, probably have different kind of buyers, especially as your product grows. As your product grows and you have more and more features, you're going to attract different kind of people. As long as you can say with some kind of confidence that you have different profiles, you should personalize. If it's 50-50, you should have two versions.
I agree with Guillaume completely. I think the need for personalization is driven by the visitors, is driven by them and their behavior and what's going to get them to do the things you want them to do on your site. The 100 visitors up, let's say it's per day, I think that'll impact how quickly can you reach an answer. And you may try with some intuition, some rules to begin. You may say, hey, look, when I use predictive lead scoring to understand this person's high value and this person's low value, I want these people to go to sales. I want these people to go to self-serve. You may just put that in as a rule, creating those different experiences, and then recognize it will take a little longer if you're running a test to reach an answer at that low traffic, but you should not personalize, to Guillaume's point, because different people behave differently.
Great, thanks guys. We've received a couple questions on the next topic, so I'm combining them into one question. So the question is, my website doesn't sell SaaS. Does this type of personalization you guys are talking about work for other types of websites too? Websites like technology services or e-commerce?
E-commerce taught us everything about personalization. Like I'm just gonna name like the one big player here, Amazon. I mean, Amazon taught us a lot about personalization, and I think it's been working fairly well for them, from all aspects. And so yeah, for e-commerce, 100%. For services, 100%. I can't really think of a business where it would not make sense.
I agree completely. Oh, go ahead, Francis.
I was going to say, I think maybe the part that's interesting is when you compare B2C and B2B is in terms of how you operate personalization. I think in B2C, the most standard way of looking at it is really oriented towards behavioral, and it's a lot of like historical purchase data. So when you take the example of Amazon, it's really about surfacing like product recommendations that make sense and understanding what products we want to send you ads about. I think the beauty of B2B, regardless of SaaS or not, is the fact that you can also leverage a lot of firmographic and technographic data to determine what is actually going to be relevant in terms of use case to pitch. And it's a little bit easier to do that than it might be in the B2C world, but still leveraging the behavioral element is critical and should be included in any kind of personalization. I think one example I was going to pick, even for the 100 visits a month, is I think it was Megan Eisenberg, who was the CMO at MongoDB, was saying whenever people would visit the career page, they would. I mean, it's like the very basic like Eloqua or Marketo lead score. Like people visit the career page more than once or twice, you basically consider that they're not a lead, and you start personalizing the website and the ads towards getting them to actually apply for a job. And on the flip side, they would also redirect any competitor who was requesting a demo or signing up for the product towards the career page. Like that's a very small personalization, but I think it all comes back to talking to your salespeople and understanding what are the different variations of the pitch that they have to do, or what are the different questions that they're having to answer. And from that, determining how you actually want to personalize the website to kind of bring some of those answers upstream. And I think that's, independent of SaaS or just B2B.
I agree completely with what Francis and Guillaume said. I'll add a little bit saying that, to Francis's point about the data, I feel like in general, we're grabbing 3 buckets of data. One is contextual. Guillaume said early on, hey, you've always got that, right? You always know where somebody was before they came to your website, time of day of week, where they are, which even in a B2B context matters, right? If they're looking at your stuff on the weekend, they're in a different mindset than Monday morning at the office. 2 is demographic or firmographic, which Francis spoke about very directly. And yes, then you will use different data. And 3 is behavioral. You can see what they've done on your site, even before they've identified themselves, before they've registered. And each of those in different industries helps you personalize that experience. I think, Francis, you triggered for me one that I feel like in the last 10 years of being a marketer, I've been guilty of repeatedly, and I see many of us do, which is to treat the returning visitor and the first-time visitor the same. Doesn't make any sense. Or treat the existing customer and the anonymous visitor the same. there's real money sitting in simply acknowledging those differences, whether you're in B2B SaaS or in some other industry. Next question.
Great, thanks guys. The next question we have is, we have a multi-platform product, app, and web. Do you have any recommendations for doing personalization across website and app stores?
Yeah, so that question is from Luis. So, I mean, it's the same underlying technology. You can use Intellimize, and I have for that. There are some challenges in the product that usually relates not to Intellimize or other personalization products, but more to like how your product works, because your app, your web app, kind of usually needs to keep some state about where the user is, what the user is doing, and so it is a bit harder. What I recommend usually is try and personalize the onboarding part of the app, right? Because that is fairly easy and does not interfere too much with the app side of the app, right? One example of that is we all have mobile phones, right? And we all have, a couple of times clicked on the link in Facebook, whatever, that brings us to like a New York Times or whatever your, I'd say, preferred news is, right? The good experience is deep linking, right? It opens the New York Times app and you go into the right article. The poor experience is that it loads the app and brings you to the homepage of the app, right? Well, apply that to the same analogy to yourself, right? The good experience is that the persona that you have identified, that you have signed up, now sees an onboarding and is dropped into the feature that is relevant to him or her. That's the right experience. So try to think about like what we've learned from mobile and B2C and apply it and drop the people in the feature that makes the most sense for them. If you don't know, a last tip I want to give you, if you don't know, ask them. I've added into my sign-up flow a single like drop down says, hey, like which feature would be most relevant, or like what's the value you want to get, right? And people can select one, and boom, drops them there, right? That's one question.
Great, thanks, G. The next question we have is, how do you measure the success of each variation?
I'll start with that one. I think you need a holdback group. You need to have people that are seeing the existing experience on your site as a permanent holdback group and comparing that to the personalization you're doing. And in fact, you could do it for the whole bucket, right? You could say, look, I'm trying all these personalization ideas. How are they as a group comparing to my website? I think we're talking about personalization, but one of the pitfalls A/B testers often fall into is saying, I've got a winner, I've got a winner, I've got a winner. And then at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, their CMO or CEO comes back and says, well, if I add up all those wins, this should be like tripling revenue. But revenue's up 30%, which is great, but that's not tripling revenue. And not having this steady state holdback group is one of the ways people often fall into that pitfall.
Great, thanks, Guy. And we have one other question. We're a small team and don't have bandwidth to have someone on our team fully devoted to personalization. How do you suggest we approach this?
Yeah, I can take that one. It has happened to me a couple of times. There's a couple of ways. I'd say you should have a stack. You should invest so that your stack, your MarTech stack, enables you to test with as little friction, as little cost as possible. All right. If it's a lot of work for your team to test a variation, you're not going to do it. So the lowest the cost, lowest the friction, the higher the pace of experimentation, the higher the learnings. One thing that's important that I'm not sure we've stated well enough is that I've been doing marketing for like, 17 years now? I never know what's going to win. I don't, right? If I knew, like none of this industry would work, right? And so I'm just testing, like, I'm throwing stuff at the wall. I'm looking at what's going to stick. I don't know, like, right? And so the point of that is you need to test a lot of variations. And for you to test a lot of variations, you need to be able to lower the cost of testing. My preferred way to do that is to outsource it, right? So I've outsourced it to Intellimize. And so I give them like, honestly, we have a Trello board, and I tell them, hey, I want this variation, and here's a creative, and here's a text, and they build it, right? That's my way to minimize, say, my friction and increase my pace. There's other ways, right? You could outsource it to like in other ways, or you could like simplify your stack. There's lots of ways. But I think the important message is ensure your stack enables you to test fast at a low cost of implementation.
Right. Maybe the one thing I will add to that is also the idea that it's understanding what stage you're at. And I think I spoke a tiny bit about this in terms like, at least on the lead scoring side of going from basic rules all the way to AI. I think on the personalization side, there's also something similar that applies, is that you don't necessarily want to run something too complicated, but it's really about understanding what is the hypothesis that you want to test. Like, where do you think you have the highest potential for improving your funnel, and actually testing around that. And personalization, I think, is how we think we can solve the funnel problem, but really what you're doing is you're testing different variants of your funnel and of your experience. Like, personalization is just like, you have the hypothesis that by making it more personal, the experience is going to be better, and therefore the conversion rates through the funnel are going to be better. So I think it's really important to consider it. It's a core part of your job as a marketer to understand how do we make the experience frictionless, and how do we make the best experience possible for the right leads. And therefore, that kind of level of personalization, I think, is critical to be a part of the strategy.
Great, thanks, guys. And it looks like we're at just about time for the webinar. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today and for your wonderful questions, making a great Q&A at the end here. If you have any further questions, please feel free to add those in right now, and we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great day, and thanks again for joining.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.